What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the PokerNews podcast. Woo woo!
Just gonna finish the shake real quick.
Yeah,
but you go ahead.
I'm just gonna finish this Runa
Beautiful.
clean energy drink. Okay, so it is the last day for us here of the World Series of Poker main event. We will do a wrap-up show after we have a champion. I'm traveling tomorrow, so we will do that likely on Thursday. But we're at the nitty-gritty, dude. This is the day we wait for all summer long, from 3 to 1.
This is it. The World Series of Poker main event of 2019 will crown its champion tonight, or maybe early tomorrow morning, which
Don't mess with me, dude.
which would suck for you. Hossein Ensan, Dario Sammartino, Alex Livingston still in the mix for that bracelet and for $10 million, and to, again, be crowned champion of the second biggest main event of all time. Pretty fired up. You excited?
Listen, this is actually not dissimilar from what we talked about yesterday, which is kind of exciting. What's up, Donna?
Donna.
I think we had both mentioned that we thought Alex Livingston might be the dark horse in this spot, and that we wouldn't be surprised to see him in the final three, kind of like sneak on in, sneak on by. And in fact, coming into the day today, Alex Livingston has about 60 big blinds and finds himself in the middle of the pack with the man we've been talking about as being so dangerous, the man that people, I think, were afraid to double up. He did indeed come in yesterday, boom, doubled up like right away,
Right
five hands in, just to make sure everybody was scared. And but he's coming in with 30 bigs. So, I mean, that's definitely a playable stack. And I saw a tweet yesterday from Alec Torelli, I want to say, that just basically said, like, is it just me or has Dario played this exactly perfect, hasn't missed a moment, hasn't missed an opportunity to apply pressure where it was possible. And as we've mentioned before, Jeff, I'm unfortunately not able to watch a lot of it a lot of the time. I did finally find someone who would share their audio with me, so I've been listening to it, but let's talk a little bit about what your thoughts are coming out of yesterday in terms of both Dario and Alex.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned them both because I think they're the two who impressed me the most. And you know what? The most. But come to think of it, I mean, I think Ensan was great too. Ensan ramped it up a little bit. Remember yesterday we were talking about the two chip leaders and Ensan and Gates, but they hadn't really been super aggressive. Would they turn things up a bit on night 2 of the final table? That's certainly what Ensan did. But somebody who we maybe didn't expect to really turn up the aggressiveness was Alex Livingston, because he had kind of flown under the radar, and that seemed to work for him throughout the entire tournament. I thought he took a much more aggressive approach, especially pre-flop, and that kind of caught his opponents off guard a little bit and really benefited him throughout the course of the night. I was super, super impressed with Livingston's play. And then Dario, I do feel like despite the early double up, that once again he was pretty card dead, but just managed to survive, managed to win a pot here and there. You know, Dario's goal was clear, like he told you, like you guys talked about. And we're back. That's a little
what
too,
happened?
Yeah, I know. What was that?
Okay.
Dario was saying, no pressure. This is like the spot that I can be in, that I can feel super comfortable in. He didn't get any cards last night, but he made things happen without forcing anything. Mm-hmm. He called Garry Gates in a nice, a decent-sized pot, I guess, on a river bet with just queen high. I mean, this is like, we know that Dario is the best player left at the table, but with that said, Livingston and Ensan have played really well throughout the course of this last week and a half or so, which makes tonight just super fascinating.
I have to always think it's been so bizarre so far with Ensan to see that he's pretty much always ahead in every hand, in every showdown, and I just don't understand how this is possible. Like, periodically, he did yesterday, I see, get into some hands where he made some folds, and the correct folds. Mm-hmm. Maybe he had a few plays where he got himself into a spot where, it may not have been the most equitable spot per se, the way that he pursued his line. But in the same sense, being the chip leader in such a vast majority the way that he was, he's more than capable of coming in, splashing around a little bit, not really maybe like always having, but every time he's getting it in, every time he's putting someone in, he has the absolute nuts. And I'm just like, does it ever run out? Like, I feel like it has to run out at some point.
Yeah, that's true. It feels like every time a hand comes down to showdown that Ensan does have the best of it, or he does, like you said, make the right fold. He folded top pair of aces to Livingston when Livingston had a queen eye flush, and he made a couple more bluffs last night than we've seen from him. He got Garry Gates off a better hand, I think, on a Jack 3-4 queen board when Ensan had 9-4 and Gates had 5s. and Gates ended up having to fold. So Ensan has turned it up just a little bit. He has more than 160 big blinds, so that's almost 3 times what Livingston has. It's about 5 times what Dario has. So it's possible, I don't want to get your hopes up too much, but it's possible that this is a pretty quick night. That Ensan busts Dario, that Ensan is just a massive chip leader going into heads up against Livingston, and Ensan continues to run pretty well, takes care of that. Now, Dario could also double up. Ensan could get involved in a big hand with Livingston, and Livingston could win, and we really could be in for a 3-handed battle for the ages.
I mean, I was saying, just for example, like, let's just say there was some crazy cooler spot between Livingston and Ensan where Ensan gets coolered, or, like we're talking 2-pair to a set or something where he's probably getting it in no matter what. I mean, he easily then goes from 160-something K to 100, and that puts our boy Livingston at, like, 120 or what. Like, it's like it could shift so fast when you get to this point in the tournament, and especially where I think what will be super fun to see, and what I always really enjoy, is that 3-handed poker, with a few exceptions. Gordon Veo, like, that was really boring, buddy. Let's brutal. Get serious. Yeah. But with a few exceptions, generally speaking, and I think if yesterday is any indication of what we can expect from today, 3-handed poker is super fun. You got to be active. Your hand values, your hand strengths go up so much, so you've got to just, like, be in the mix. You can't be letting the blinds are going up so fast, like, you just can't miss it. And I think, okay, so of course as someone who has to leave on an airplane tomorrow, I need to be, like, rooting for Dario to bust, and for us to just move on with this whole thing. But I do think, because I'm the most familiar with Dario's play style, it's going to be fun to watch him play if he does get some chips, and that he's clearly going to be the most active, aggressive player. Although he really hasn't had that opportunity, I think, like, the whole tournament.
I mean, he's done such a good job at not forcing the action, but now, to your point, when we're down to just 3-handed, he can, if he does double up, I should say, like, really start to go for it in certain spots. Forcing might be the wrong word, but he will definitely play a lot more hands, I would say. So I think we'll see the real Dario tonight, which makes for super entertaining and super compelling poker. This is where the pay jumps, I feel like, that third to second jump, that $2 million jump, I get the ICM conversation from a main event standpoint, because every pay jump is, of course, massive. Like, 9th to 8th is $250K, 8th to 7th is $275K. But the top, and you said it starting last week when we heard the payouts, it's so top heavy. Mm-hmm. Like, when are you going to have the opportunity again to play shorthanded to try to win $10 million? Scott Seaver said it best on Twitter. He thinks, like, this is the biggest, like, reverse ICM spot in the history of poker tournaments, because when are you ever going to have a chance to get that $10 million up top? But with that said, this is where it starts to get really fascinating, because that pay jump from third to second is $2 million. So does Livingston kind of just, like, sit out and wait for Ensan to bust Dario? Does Livingston play super tight when Dario's involved, just so when he does get into a hand with him, he has it and busts him? I don't know. It's another fascinating dynamic. My man Ben Ludlow said it. Dario playing that short stack perfectly. He's played 2 nights of, I think, perfect poker, and he's so good that he could think to himself, like, I'm much better than these guys. I could just play all the hands and be fine. That's not what he's done throughout the course of the last couple nights.
But you have to come in. I have to know that Dario's coming in so confident every day. Imagine getting to a WSOP main event final table and having essentially 0 other professional, like, super professional poker players at the table with you. Like, he's not coming into the final table with Benba, this time, or with, I'm just trying to think of, final, Antoine's out, like, just thinking of all these final tables in the last few years. It's like, generally speaking, we're looking at 4 to 5 professional poker players and maybe 4 to 5 more casual, amateur-ish, like Rex. Although, I want to talk a little bit about Alex Livingston, because I'm not as familiar. I want to take a look at his Hendon. I want to take a look at he seems clearly Yesterday we saw a lot of times he's clearly capable of doing math really fast and really sharp. He picked up on a few errors and a few different things going on. I really appreciated he actually called out that Garry didn't receive the appropriate change in one spot, and like for another player to do that, again, it shows real integrity, real strength, and also just a really clear awareness of what's happening all around you with everyone in every given moment.
Yeah, I mean, he's experienced. He plays quickly, so he's a joy to watch, especially when you compare him to Kevin Maahs, which we'll get to in a minute or two. And he doesn't have the Dario Sammartino resume or even the Hossein Ensan resume as far as tournament wins are concerned. But he does have a deep run in the main, which we've seen a couple times on the broadcast, which I know you aren't able to watch all the time. But occasionally they do flash back to that 2013 main event where he finished in 13th for $451,000. So,
that just can you imagine like thinking you're never getting that close again?
Oh yeah,
and then finally
just 6 years later get to the final three.
So crazy.
And I saw him say afterwards to some reporters that yesterday he went into the tournament with the mindset of, I'm playing the big 50 tonight. There might be cameras, there might be lights, we might have a lot of chips, but I'm playing the big 50. And he really thought that helped. And you could see a difference in his play from night 1 of the final table to night 2 of the final table. Again, I said it at the beginning of this podcast. I was just super impressed with Livingston and the way he ramped up the aggressiveness last night. And if players were watching the previous night's coverage and the previous week's coverage, I think that they considered Livingston to be a lot stronger than he actually was in certain spots. And so I think he was great. He's got some experience. He seems to have the right mindset. He's
is he a cash game player? Is he a professional poker player?
I don't know, he might be, but he is a professional poker player. He is a professional poker player, and he does
this
have
is
a
what
long list of results.
I got completely wrong, and we'll talk more about Maahs, obviously, like you mentioned. But in doing the bus side interview yesterday with Kevin Maahs, he told me I'm not a professional poker player, like by any means, which I had kind of assumed that he was. And then when I interviewed Nick Marchington, he said I am a professional poker player, and I think he definitely got the reputation for whatever reason as not being a professional poker player, maybe because he's 21. But I'm just like wanting to get clear on Alex Livingston's like profile. Is he a banker? Is he like, does he play professional poker? I don't know. If he doesn't, then he could make a case that he should be playing professional.
For sure,
I would say,
and maybe it's cash games, but he has tournament results all across the world, from Berlin to Barcelona, to Canada to England to Razvedov. It seems like he plays World Series of Poker Europe all the time. So I think we can at least qualify him as a pro.
It's coming. Sorry. I had to switch it, guys. It was way too bright. It was freaking me out. For those who are just listening, I just did a little bit of camera adjustment here because it was like so yellow. It was just absolutely freaking me out.
So can we get to Maahs? Like, I'm curious what he told you in the exit interview. He clearly told Norman, Chad, and Lon McCarron before play started. Like, we thought they would ask him about it. And he was like, yeah, that's just the way I play poker. I just take my time all the time. That's even how I do it in home games, which, again, it's like it's just kind of mind-boggling. And he's like, I'm not trying to put my opponents on tilt, but if it does, like, cool. So he busted first, I think, to the delight of everybody except for his rail. He certainly didn't play. I don't think he really played any faster, maybe a touch here and there. I was happy, I'll be honest, to see him go just because I think, again, I said this last night, but the exposure that poker gets at this moment on ESPN, you have to do everything you can to reach out to that casual viewer and bring him in. You don't have to, I shouldn't say that, but I would hope that the players want to in order to grow this game. And when players turn to Maahs, and when fans turn to Maahs, and they see him tanking with like the 8-3 off and asking for chip counts, it's just going to turn them to a different channel pretty quickly. So
he doesn't care about that, and I did clarify that with him real quick.
Okay, yeah, tell me about that.
So the interview started out pretty awkward, and I was kind of wondering like what my fellow media fam was doing, because like I thought the first question out the gate, right? Like we don't need to lube this guy up. Like let's just ask him what's going on. But like people are asking like how are you feeling and like what's like I was just like hey listen.
Yeah, there's one storyline here.
He said something like, I played the way that I usually play, blah, 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 something like in answering, how he felt about his bust out or whatever. And so Snap was like, so when you say you play the way you usually play, do you usually take this long to make decisions?
Yeah, there we go.
And to which he responded, interestingly, actually, I would say his response to like every question was very detailed and long.
Okay.
And I will actually argue that I liked him quite a lot more than I thought I would. But he said basically that in live games a lot, it is really tilting to other players that he takes so long, and that generally works in his favor because it does piss people off.
Okay.
But he said that the difference, obviously, in this spot is that in normal poker, everybody doesn't see your hole cards, and so it's actually less clear when you're doing this. And so he's like, well, it's really never been a problem. This is what I do most of the time, but it's never been as annoying because everyone doesn't know. And he actually said that he had asked and requested not to show his hole cards, which
Good luck
we've
getting
had
that
this
one
argument
through.
before.
Yeah.
This is not the
You're
first
drawing
time.
dead there.
Yeah, this is not the first time that someone has requested that, which was kind of a funny joke. But then I did appreciate Remco followed up after I asked that question, and he asked him, well, do you like watching poker where people tank forever?
Oh, good question.
And he kind of went on for a while and back and forth, and essentially he said, like, I really don't care what anybody out there thinks about how entertaining it is, which I also can appreciate. Legitimately, when I'm putting myself in his shoes, if I'm playing for $10 million, like, no fucks are given about
Sure.
like how entertaining I'm being or what people think about me. And he said that he actually embraces the role of being the villain, and I think we saw that even, when right after we had finished the podcast yesterday, I'm walking down the hallway, I see his rail coming in, and they have the sign that says like the tank commander or whatever, which I was just like, gosh, that's such a giant fuck you to all of us.
Yeah.
And so we were all obviously just so rooting against him. But if I could say anything, I would say this, and it definitely made me think a little bit about my own self. This sounds ridiculous, but he's 27 years old. He said as much in his interview, and I was thinking, okay, I'm like almost 36. I'm like about 10 years older than he is. And I was thinking, it seems so weird to say it, but I was like, oh, he's just 27, Like, it sounds so stupid and I sound ridiculous, but the way that he was talking, it was just this like hubris and this sort of mentality that I feel like, when you're like 25, 26, 27, you're like just stepping out into the world, and you're like, I don't care about anything, and I'm so like such a unique snowflake. And then like, eventually you realize at a certain point that, like, the people around you matter, and like it does matter what type of reputation you have, and I just think he's young enough that maybe that really doesn't matter to him yet.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, like I said yesterday, I wanted to like him, and his bust out interview is great, and you see the clips of him talking about his dad and how good of a time his dad's having, and that's great, and you can tell that the support means a lot to him, and that's great. And like, I wouldn't even mind if he was tanking in spots where like he had a decision to make,
like even a little decision.
Like even a little decision. Like he just is taking so long in the most unnecessary spots. It's just it's like alienating me for sure, and viewership as well.
And there's ways to do that, I think, exactly like you're saying. When there are decisions and when there are moments, everybody understands, and everybody understands this is life-changing money, but everyone also understands that it affects the game, it affects everyone and everything on like such a macro level when one person is behaving like this.
And if you're trying to throw players off, like, it's the main event, these guys are awesome, come up with a new strategy, my man.
But everyone
like,
can
isn't
see.
Gonna work.
Everyone can see, which is what we talked about yesterday.
Exactly.
It's one thing when nobody can see, but when everyone sees, it's like everyone. And even there was a couple points yesterday where you had like ace king or like a few like actual hands, and people are just like, dude, like, get it going. Nobody wants to give you time anymore, which makes sense. And we saw this sort of with Will Kassouf, like a slightly different version, but still like the taking a long time thing. And
Damian Salas last year at the final table.
It's just frustrating. It's frustrating for everyone. And I, for one, am looking forward to, like, it's funny, and I mentioned this yesterday, because Dario on the high roller scene, and there's several high rollers who are kind of notorious for this type of behavior. Sure. I would say Doc Sands, of course, like the way he puts the chips in and takes forever. And Dario is known for being somebody who takes a long time to make decisions, and also that he is like we saw with Sam Greenwood, he'll like get in people's faces and stare at them for too long. But at least there's something about that that's like moderately interesting, or feels like a stylistic choice or something. Like it's not just like being a prick.
He has a decision to make.
Yes.
Like he's got to weigh both sides or multiple sides of a decision. In Maahs' case, so often when he was thinking, there is one result that has 100.00% certainty that you're going to come to. That result is fold. And like it just, like I just don't get it.
Well, we're so glad that he's gone, and I'm really hoping now that we're three-handed, we're going to get to see some of this Dario, like, in-your-face tells action. This is one of the things that he's more notorious for, is being able to pick up on live tells.
Yeah.
We actually spoke about this earlier in the WSOP. He made a couple of just incredible plays during some of the mixed games that he got super deep in, and some of the other no-limit events where sometimes when you see people who are able to, and he even said, like, I had a tell on this guy.
Yeah.
And so this is something he's very good at. Now, I don't know enough about Alex Livingston or Hossein Ensan to say whether or not they do have tells, but I can say if there is a spot where we're going to see it, and if there is a spot where we're going to see Dario be able to utilize that element of his, bag of tricks, it's going to be fun and exciting, I think, for us to watch.
I think so too, because as we've said throughout the last week, he's always one of the most entertaining characters left. He's still dressing up. He's still looking sharp. I'm sure he'll look great tonight. I know you think that'll get more women into poker.
That's
just a little Dario Sammartino action.
I'm just scrolling through the photos looking for
Yeah.
thumbnails and stuff for my videos, and I'm just like, it's just the Dario show, basically. Did he take
Dario
a
in
class?
the suit.
And speaking of, this is another thing I would say is the one thing I would say, especially everyone's like, screw the November 9, and there is part of this being over that I'm like really relieved about. It's over. But a lot of the guys clearly didn't have any media training. And for example, Kevin Maahs had I wanted to, and maybe the other media may have been able to do this, he said a lot of things yesterday that would be very, very easy to pull out of context and make him sound terrible. He literally said, I don't care about the people watching. And then right afterwards he said, I care, but blah, blah, blah. And as a human being, you can understand what he's saying, but there was so many things he said that you could easily tear out of context. And it's very clear that these guys, they're probably not sleeping very much.
Yeah.
They've been running an adrenaline high for more than a week now, and in fact, Garry, when he busted yesterday, it was hands down one of my most intense moments, I think, in my poker career. And he broke down, he totally broke down. And I can imagine he's been keeping so much emotion inside and there's so much pressure and so much love and so much excitement and just so much going on that you can see these guys are really, I bet they're going to be really relieved for it to be over too.
I mean, let's get into that. Garry Gates out in fourth last night, takes home $3 million, which is obviously awesome. Of course, coming into the day, he was in second place. He had a pretty big chip stack and just could not get anything going yesterday. So at the end, it's like he just goes straight to his rail. He almost bows to his rail, but it was a bowing thank you guys for being there for me. You said it. He broke down a little bit in his interview with Kara. He broke down a little bit in his press conference with you guys. It just seemed like did it seem like a relief in any way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I don't know how much I should or shouldn't say in terms of, having personal relationships with people on Israel, but I think a lot of people had, I think it's difficult when you're not a professional poker player, for one thing, because you're always going to question your own self, right, and question your own decisions. And I think a lot of the internet had a lot to say about a lot of the play the last few days, and I, for one, know it's the same as choosing not to read YouTube comments, because whenever I do, it doesn't matter. It gets in your head. And he's online, I'm sure, reading the nice comments that people are sending him thank yous, but you can't help but start to question yourself. And I think some people had, said things to him even oh, you don't want Dario to double up, and all normal things that you're just going to hear in the course of things, but that I can see how for his mindset, a couple people from Israel had said, I don't know, he seems less confident today than he has the last few days, which is interesting because he was in a better position coming in yesterday than he had the rest of the whole entire tournament. But it goes to show, I think, that where your mind is at is a huge part of what your poker game is going to look like, no matter how much you try to hide it. But I had known that Jason bought him in, but I thought he was going to keep that kind of on the wraps, or I don't know, I thought it was kind of a secret, but he let it out that Jason Mercier had been like the primary person behind buying him in, and they've been friends for a really long time, and I effing love Jason. He's like one of my favorite people in the game, and it's so Jason to just like have faith in somebody and like put him in. And even Jason has pulled away from poker a lot because he feels the responsibility of being a father. Mm-hmm. And so then to also see Jason basically not play poker most of the summer, like just come here for a couple weeks. He decided to like take a vacation with his family or something instead of come to the WSOP. And I'd spoken to him and Natasha about it before. He's like, these are moments I'll never get back. Like I can always play poker. But then to see him still like get a couple milli like out of the summer, I'm just like, it's so great to see these people making these, bold decisions. But I have to imagine for Garry, he was carrying the weight of a lot of people and a lot of things on his shoulders. And he said multiple times in the interview, I can't wait to get back to my routine. I'm just really excited to get back to my routine. Right. And so you can see how like, dude, your life is just shook up for a little bit and you just want to like be a normal person for a few days.
And I think it's easy on the outside looking in to be like, oh, of course this guy's good, after the fact because he just won $3 million, blah, blah, he had a great experience. But it'd be very easy to be in Garry Gates' shoes and be very upset after how yesterday went. To maybe no fault of his own, maybe some fault of his own, who knows? But a lot of players would not be able to be that gracious in the moment, to express that kind of gratitude to his support system, even though he had just won a ton of money. Like, I can imagine that there are some feelings there that made him just super upset, but he's able to overcome them with the joy and happiness that like he's able to put it all in perspective, I think, a lot easier than most people.
He's also been in the poker world long enough to know the right things to say. I will at least give him that I think he was so genuine. There was nothing that wasn't genuine about his behavior. But when you compare it to, say, some other poker players who this is their first time around poker media, this is their first time in the spotlight, we're all there.
Sucks.
Literally, the poker media is all there, and we're some of his best friends. We've all got drunk together with him. We've like worked together with him, and so I think there was an honesty that he was able to sort of get down to and connect with. And but I also, it's interesting because as much support as you have, I feel like you also have an equal amount of pressure somehow to perform, right?
No
that like everyone's there and everyone's rooting for you and you just don't want to make mistakes. And I was even talking to Christy Arnett yesterday about how it's almost worse for people to be seeing and judging your decisions and mistakes than it is to just make mistakes, right? Like, you make mistakes in poker all the time and you can just hate yourself about it or whatever, but it's like being on that stage, having the whole poker world, every friend and family member that's like ever loved on you, everybody's watching. People who don't. My mom sent me a message today like, it was so great watching Garry the last few days, like tell him I'm proud of him. I'm like, my mom's watching him, like I think I have to imagine that he felt as much joy as he felt, he also must have felt that much pressure.
Yeah, I think so too. You could see it on his face a little bit, like when things were not going that well for him. But he tried to rally, and then he got it in with the sixes against the queens. And again,
just such a sick spot.
Yeah. It's just going to happen. Again, I keep going back to his bust out interview with Kara because, as she should have, she asked her, what do you think went wrong today? And he's like, nothing went wrong. This is great. This is awesome. He said, at the end, he said, we won. Guys, we won. It's just like he considers himself kind of on the same team as his whole support system. Like it's a group effort, which I think, as weird as that may be to say, considering poker's an individual competition, it really is like in the grind of a World Series of Poker main event, when this is the 12th day of the tournament. Of course you can weigh in the days off at the beginning, but you need those people to have your back, to lift you up, to not let you get too high, to not let you get too low. I mean, that's just super important, and that's a vital aspect of any World Series of Poker main event run.
He said, too, that he was just sticking to the game that he had that got him there, but I really have a hard time believing that with all of those amazing professional poker players that he has on his rail, that there wasn't like a few tips and tricks that people were throwing in there. I have to imagine that, the rest of his team who's all watching the coverage, that they aren't, saying like, oh, like you might want to like pick it up here a little bit, or I don't know. And the fact that he does respect and love his I call him his team, but like his friends and his rails so much. I think hearing that from people you respect and love, how can you not try to make a few adjustments here or there and try to, I mean, what we got basically from both the players yesterday who busted is both of them said, like, I'm trying to win. And I can really respect that.
Yeah, I feel like out of the 5 that we had left going into, and maybe even the 9, everybody's pretty much going for the win. There's always talk about ICM and pay jumps, et cetera, et cetera. We just talked about it 20 minutes ago. But let's think about it. Milos just ready to get the chips in.
Yeah.
Like Timothy Sue, pocket threes under the gun, whatever, I'm all in. Nick Marchington, that kid was playing to win. We've seen that for the last couple of days. We had Kevin Maahs yesterday playing to win. Garry Gates was certainly playing to win. I'm forgetting somebody in 6th place, and that person is Zenkai. Zenkai obviously playing to win. He's like putting all the chips in with King High.
Yeah.
It's just I think that's part of what's made this final table entertaining, because all these guys, like, they're going for it. It might look like Dario is playing for the pay jumps, but he's just playing smart poker. He just hasn't really seen any hands, and he's put himself in a position where he could win. Ensan ramped it up yesterday, trying to build on that chip lead. Livingston kind of came out of nowhere yesterday and just started playing super aggressively, especially in pre-flop spots. So we have 3 guys who clearly really want this bracelet.
Scott says best final table action I've ever seen, which that's really interesting.
It might be, yeah. I mean, I'm just off the top of my head, you mentioned 2016 was absolutely terrible, which it was. 2017 had your boy John Hasp, so you might be partial to that one.
Fair.
But it was, I mean, Blumstein was pretty entertaining with his style throughout that, because he was just so different and so unique. And then last year we had the epic heads-up battle between Johnson and Tony Miles,
who both of them were like throwing out crazy bluffs and making crazy calls.
That was a sick
and
one too.
It was like, for as long as that lasted, it was not boring.
But from beginning to end, this one, is, I think, pretty high up on the list for sure.
Yeah, and honestly, because you always have some players who are going to play really interesting styles and really aggressive, and even back from like John Dolan and Joseph Chong, and like, I can think there's always a couple players at the table that are super fun to watch and that take interesting lines and are just dynamic, I think, at the table. And then you have those players that are like more vanilla, or maybe they slow down their style because of whatever. But you're right. In this, there was basically 9 players who were all pretty like down to just get it going and get it in. That's what she said. And I really hope that continues into tonight. Now, unfortunately, the way that it works out here, more often than not, I'm doing bust-out interviews when all the other players who are returning for the next day are giving their mini interviews about what to expect from the next day. So I'm really curious, did they say anything? Does ESPN just shut it down at the end? Like, I'm really curious what the players said at the end of last night about their expectations for today.
The only ESPN interview afterwards was with Garry Gates, which makes sense in that spot. You want to interview, one of the most charismatic guys that are left at the final table, especially after he just busted. There wasn't too much that I saw out of the scrums from the remaining 3 players. I think that the biggest point was Livingston with his mindset change, saying I'm going into this like it's the big 50. And, the other players are approaching it like it's the main event, but I'm trying to put in my mind, make the plays that you would make in the big 50.
Right.
Don't consider the fact that this is the World Series of Poker main event. So that's been the most interesting thing to me, and one of the more interesting dynamics that we saw last night, and that we should see tonight. I mean, they're gonna go at it. You think Ensan coasts, or you think somebody else makes a run at it?
It's so interesting to think. I mean,
and let us know in the chat too what you guys predict will happen.
I have to feel like, just from a statistical likelihood, that there needs to be at least one spot where Ensan gets it all in against someone else where he doesn't win. Like, that's just like in a 50-50, like a 50-50 spot or whatever, like a 49-51 spot. Like, one time Ensan has to not have the pocket pair when the other guy has the ace jack or whatever and doesn't get there.
But Dario had the ace jack yesterday against Ensan, but I guess he didn't have that many chips. Like, they had a flip to start, and that was against Ensan. That was like the only hand we saw Ensan lose.
For like 20
So we thought,
bigs.
we're like, there it is.
One time.
He's finally lost, and here comes the downfall. And he's like, nah, I'll just win my next 20 pots. No
Yeah,
big deal.
you're right. And it really does seem, he's playing solid enough that, what do you think? It's interesting.
Yeah, I don't. I think Ensan coasts to a win tonight, and that I think Dario is an unbelievable player. I think Livingston's been awesome. I don't even remember the amount of times that I've said just in this very podcast that I've been impressed with Livingston's play.
Yeah.
I just think it just feels like it's Ensan's tournament to lose. If he runs even decent, he can protect this chip lead and take it down.
All right, then I'm just going to take the opposite because someone has to do it. I'm going to take – this sounds so bad, but I think Livingston would probably be the biggest want for us in this spot, mostly because it's Ensan to lose. Everybody knows Dario. He's got, the craziest, biggest rail. So, I might just take Livingston to win.
Good,
just to really stick it in. But
it'll take the longest maybe, but
yeah.
I think Livingston would represent the game really well. I think he'd take on that ambassador role pretty well. I think Dario and Ensan would too, just in different ways, more of an
I want to see Dario
approach.
win, obviously, so then we can look at what the stats are on women in poker
next year's
following
main
this.
event explosion.
Yes, we can really know what the deal is. Obviously, I want Dario to win. I think it's good for poker in general. I just think he's really charming, really fun to watch, really just an interesting player. But yeah, if that happens, it's going to take 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And I think Ensan's great, but to be fair, he's been really boring to watch, in my opinion. That's so terrible to say. I hope no one ever watches this because, I remember when he won in Prague, he was so excited.
Yeah.
He, had glasses and a scarf, and he was like, everyone, come, take a picture, blah, blah, blah. He was so dynamic and so interesting. And so maybe there is this other side of his personality that we just haven't seen. But so far, at the table, it's just been, for me, not that interesting. I'd rather watch someone that's going to, I like watching Dario because it's like Daniel, where you watch something and you're it's like magic. How did you do that?
Right. Yeah,
being able to pick up these live tells and being able to freaky stare at someone. It's you
cool.
have such giant balls, and it's interesting to watch.
But if you were able to watch the whole broadcast every night, I think you would see better moments from Ensan than maybe you've seen in a more limited sample size, because he has started he does a little bit of talking during hands. When he's won a big hand, he's kind of giving this to his rail, kind of let's go. He's been pretty cool, I feel and pretty entertaining to watch. Not the most entertaining guy on the planet, but I think you'd come around on him pretty quickly if I showed you the tapes of all of the main event play.
I love everyone. All right, you guys. Well, it's about to get down. I'm going to go ahead and go get ready to do the do my update video. We will come to you guys on Thursday with all the chat, figure out what went down, get your guys' thoughts on this main event final table, but it's all happening. This is the most exciting time in poker. I'm going to guess what cards are in the air 6 p.m. local time, so ESPN 6 p.m. Cards are in the air here at 5:30.
Yeah, exactly.
So 6 p.m. you guys should be able to watch on ESPN, and of course PokerNews.com will do live, actually live, no delay. So if you missed something, you got to come back, you're not sure, you can get hand-for-hand coverage on PokerNews.com live. Basically, that's the only way I'm ever able to figure out what's going on after I can't catch all the rest of the stuff.
Right.
And I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Global Poker. They've been our sponsors for the podcast most of the summer. We really appreciate it. This is how we're able to do this stuff and make it make sense why we take all the time to do this stuff. Global Poker is the home of online poker in America, thanks to their massive weekly tournament schedule and the chance to win through their jackpot sit-and-goes. With more than 1 million registered players in the United States, if you're not playing on Global Poker, you're missing out. Head to www.globalpoker.com and set up an account today. Deuces.